Facing the line of duty means acknowledging that every passing second has profound consequences. Prepare yourself for an entirely unfiltered experience. There are no scripts to follow here, only the raw, authentic reality of the job.
Okay.
Don't move. Drop it on the ground now.
I'm a United States immigration judge. My credentials are in my briefcase.
We know you're tight. Fake papers, fake titles, get down.
Yeah, sure you are.
Stay still.
Easy, easy. I got it on video.
5:46 a.m. on a quiet Wednesday morning in Bethesda, Maryland, 4 ICE agents in full tactical gear pulled into the driveway of a brick colonial home on a tree-lined street where nothing ever happened. They moved fast, fanning out across the property like they were executing a raid on a known fugitive. The woman they surrounded was standing beside her silver sedan, loading a leather briefcase into the back seat. She wore a pressed charcoal suit and low heels. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She was heading to work. She never made it past her own driveway. The lead agent drew his weapon and pointed it at her chest. "Get on the ground, now!" She stopped moving. Her hands rose slowly, palms open. "I'm a United States immigration judge. My credentials are in my briefcase." The lead agent didn't lower his weapon. He laughed, short and sharp. "Sure you are." His partner grabbed her arm and forced her down. Her knees hit the concrete first, then her chest, then her face. The briefcase fell open on the driveway, scattering judicial dockets and a Department of Justice credential across the pavement. They cuffed her with her cheek pressed against the cold ground, her glasses cracked beneath her, her suit jacket torn at the shoulder. She did not resist. She did not raise her voice. Across the street, a retired federal marshal named Leonard Abrams stood at his front window, phone already recording. He had spent 30 years in federal law enforcement and knew exactly what he was watching. "That's not a raid," he muttered. "That's an assault." The entire arrest took less than 3 minutes. The fallout would take years. The woman on that driveway was Judge Denise Oyewale, 52 years old, and she had earned every letter of that title through decades of work that most people couldn't imagine. Born in Lagos, Nigeria, she immigrated to the United States at age 9 with her parents, who arrived with 2 suitcases and a belief that this country rewarded discipline and education. She became a naturalized citizen at 18, the same year she graduated high school as valedictorian. She attended Howard University on a full academic scholarship, graduating top of her class, and then Columbia Law School, where she was elected to law review and graduated with honors. She clerked for a federal appellate judge in the Fourth Circuit, a position given only to the most exceptional law graduates in the country. After her clerkship, she spent 8 years as a public defender, specializing in immigration cases, representing people who had no money, no voice, and no one else willing to fight for them. Her record in that role was remarkable, winning cases that more experienced attorneys had written off as hopeless. At 40, she was appointed to the bench at the Arlington Immigration Court, one of the busiest and most scrutinized courts in the federal system. For 12 years, she had served with a reputation for fairness, legal precision, and rulings so well-reasoned that her overturn rate on appeal was among the lowest in the country. Attorneys on both sides of the aisle respected her. She lived alone in the Bethesda home she had shared with her late husband, Commander Isaiah Oyewale, a Navy veteran who passed 4 years earlier. She was meticulous, dignified, and private. And on that Wednesday morning, she was face down on her own driveway in handcuffs, bleeding from a scrape on her cheek, being treated like a fugitive by men who hadn't bothered to check whether they had the right person. The lead agent who ordered Judge Oyewale to the ground that morning was Supervisory Deportation Officer Craig Vanderhook, 44 years old, 15 years with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Within ICE, Vanderhook was known for one thing above all else: numbers. He ran more field operations than any other supervisor in his region, logged more arrests per quarter, and built a reputation as someone who got results. His superiors rewarded that reputation with promotions, commendations, and the kind of institutional protection that came with being a producer. What they ignored was everything underneath. The DHS Office of Inspector General had flagged Vanderhook twice in 5 years for questionable arrests. Once for detaining a legal permanent resident whose documents were in order, and once for executing an operation at the wrong address entirely. Both times, the cases were reviewed internally and closed without formal discipline. Colleagues had noticed a pattern they didn't talk about openly. Vanderhook's operations disproportionately targeted Black and African immigrants. The addresses he chose, the names he prioritized, the neighborhoods he hit first, always seemed to skew in one direction. No one filed a formal complaint. No one wanted to be the person who challenged a supervisor with Vanderhook's numbers and Vanderhook's connections. His team operated the same way. Agent Scott Pruitt, 36, had been with Vanderhook for 4 years. He mirrored his supervisor's aggression on every operation, never questioned a call, and treated Vanderhook's orders as final. Agent Domingo Farrell, 33, handled logistics and paperwork. He kept the files organized and the reports clean, and he had learned early that asking too many questions about operational decisions was a career-limiting move. Then there was Agent Tina Kowalski, 29, the newest member of the unit, just 7 months on the team. She had transferred in from a desk role, hoping for field experience. What she found instead was a unit that operated more like a personal squad than a federal team, where one man made every decision and 3 others followed without a word. Vanderhook stepped out of the lead vehicle at 5:47 a.m. with his weapon already drawn. The street was silent. No traffic, no dog walkers, just the faint sound of a sprinkler 2 houses down and the low idle of 2 unmarked SUVs in the driveway. Judge Oyewale had just placed her briefcase in the back seat of her sedan when Vanderhook's voice cut across the morning air. "Don't move. Drop the bag. Get on the ground." She turned slowly, hands rising instinctively. Her eyes moved from the weapon to the tactical vest to the ICE insignia on his chest. She did not panic. Her voice came out steady and clear. "I am Judge Denise Oyewale. I'm a United States immigration judge with the Arlington Immigration Court. You have the wrong person. I'd like to see a warrant." Vanderhook didn't pause. "We don't need a warrant. ICE operations don't require one. Get on the ground now." That statement was a distortion of the law, and he either knew it or didn't care. Pruitt moved behind her and grabbed her arm, pulling it back and forcing her downward. Her knees hit the driveway first, the concrete biting through her suit pants, then her chest, then her face. The sound of her glasses cracking against the pavement was sharp enough that a neighbor 2 doors down later said she heard it from inside her kitchen. Her briefcase had fallen open on impact, scattering court dockets, case files, and a laminated Department of Justice credential across the driveway for anyone to see. Pruitt planted a knee between her shoulder blades and held her there. Vanderhook looked down at the DOJ credential lying face up on the pavement. He picked it up, glanced at it, and tossed it back onto the ground. People fake these all the time. Kowalski stood 6 feet away, her hand resting on her vest, her body still. She said nothing. Her face showed everything. Farrell had already moved to the sedan and was searching the interior without consent, pulling open the glove box, checking beneath seats, rifling through a bag in the trunk. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. By now, 3 neighbors were recording from porches and windows. Across the street, Leonard Abrams, 68 years old, retired federal marshal, held his phone with one hand and dialed 911 with the other. His voice was calm and precise. "I need to report federal agents assaulting a federal judge in her own driveway. No warrant presented. She is compliant and on the ground. Send local police immediately." They lifted Judge Oyewale off the driveway and placed her in the back seat of the lead SUV, still cuffed, her wrists pressed together behind her back with the metal biting into her skin. The door shut hard. No one offered an explanation. No one read her rights. No one acknowledged the DOJ credential still lying on the pavement beside her scattered case files. Inside the vehicle, she sat upright, posture straight despite the pain in her knees and the sting on her cheek where the concrete had scraped the skin raw. She spoke clearly. "Who are you looking for? I want to know the name on your operation order." Vanderhook, seated in the front passenger seat, didn't turn around. She tried again. I'm requesting your names and badge numbers. I have a legal right to that information. Pruitt, behind the wheel, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Stop talking or it gets worse. The drive to the ICE field office took 12 minutes. During those 12 minutes, the body camera mounted on Kowalski's tactical vest was recording. It captured the interior of the vehicle, the audio, the voices. It captured Vanderhook leaning back in his seat, relaxed, and saying to no one in particular, "Another one pretending to be somebody. These Africans always have fake papers." Farrell, seated beside Kowalski in the back row, laughed. A short, careless laugh. The kind of sound a person makes when cruelty has become routine. Kowalski sat still. Her camera kept rolling. She said nothing. At the field office, Judge Oyewale was walked through a side entrance and placed in a processing hold. A bare concrete room with a metal bench, fluorescent lighting, and a steel door. It was the same room used for immigration detainees awaiting transfer or removal proceedings. She was fingerprinted. Her photograph was taken. She stood in front of a height chart in a torn suit with a scraped face and broken glasses, processed like someone who had crossed a border illegally, not someone who had spent 12 years deciding those very cases from the bench. When the processing officer asked her name, she answered, "Judge Denise Oyewale, Arlington Immigration Court, Department of Justice." The officer's hands stopped moving. He looked at her, then at the screen, then back at her. He set down his pen, stood without a word, and left the room. He came back 2 minutes later with a supervisor. Deputy Field Office Director Nathan Solis was at his desk reviewing overnight reports when the processing officer appeared in his doorway, pale and speaking fast. Solis listened for 10 seconds, then turned to his terminal and typed in the name. Oyewale Denise. The federal system returned results immediately. Judicial appointment confirmed. Department of Justice credential number active. Naturalization certificate filed and recorded. Immigration judge, Arlington Immigration Court, 12-year tenure. Solis stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he stood and walked down the hallway to the processing hold. He opened the steel door and saw her. A sitting United States immigration judge in a wrinkled charcoal suit, one cheek raw and swollen, glasses cracked and sitting crooked on her face, wrists red from cuffs. Seated on a metal bench between two immigration detainees who had been picked up overnight. She looked up at him with an expression that wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was recognition. The recognition of someone who had spent her career inside this system and was now being consumed by it. Solis uncuffed her himself. His hands were not steady. "Ma'am, I am deeply sorry." He asked where Vanderhook was. He was told the break room. Solis found him there, leaning against the counter, eating a breakfast sandwich, scrolling through his phone. Solis kept his voice low, but the edge was unmistakable. "Do you know who you just brought in?" Vanderhook didn't look up immediately. Address matched, description matched. Clean grab. Solis stepped closer. The address did not match. The name did not match. The target on your operation order is a 28-year-old male from Guatemala named Raul Cifuentes. You arrested a 52-year-old woman from Nigeria. A federal judge, Craig. A sitting immigration judge with the Department of Justice. Vanderhook finally looked up. His expression shifted, but only slightly. "So we'll cut her loose. Happens sometimes." Solis shook his head slowly. "No. This doesn't just happen. Nothing about this matched. Not the gender, not the age, not the nationality, not the name, not the address. You had no warrant, no probable cause, and no legal basis for this arrest. And you put a federal judge face down on her own driveway." Vanderhook set down the sandwich. For the first time that morning, something behind his eyes changed. Not remorse, not guilt. Just the first faint recognition that this one might not go away quietly. Deputy Field Office Director Solis escorted Judge Oyewale to a private office, offered her water, a first aid kit, and a phone. She declined the water. She cleaned the scrape on her cheek herself, pressing a gauze pad against the raw skin with steady hands. Then she picked up the phone and began making calls. The first went to Chief Immigration Judge Sandra Levesque at the Arlington Immigration Court. Oyewale spoke for less than 2 minutes, her voice controlled and precise, recounting the arrest, the driveway, the cuffs, the processing hold, the concrete room. Levesque listened without interrupting. When Oyewale finished, Levesque said one sentence. "I'm calling the Attorney General's office now." The second call went to the Executive Office for Immigration Review, the federal body that oversees all immigration courts. Oyewale filed a formal incident report by phone, detailing the agents involved, the time of arrest, and the absence of any warrant. The third call went to the Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General. Oyewale requested a formal investigation into civil rights violations, excessive force, and unlawful detention by ICE personnel. The fourth call went to her personal attorney, a former federal prosecutor named Victor Langston, who had spent 20 years handling civil rights cases at the highest levels. She told him what happened. He told her not to make any public statements and that he would be at her home within the hour. Within 90 minutes of her release, the chief immigration judge had notified the Attorney General's office directly. The DOJ Civil Rights Division had been alerted and was assembling a preliminary review team. The DHS Office of Inspector General had opened a formal inquiry. Leonard Abrams' video, recorded from his window across the street, was already circulating among federal law enforcement contacts, shared by retired agents who recognized exactly what it showed. By noon, 3 members of Congress had been briefed by staff. The facts were simple and devastating. A black female federal judge had been dragged from her driveway, forced to the ground, cuffed, scraped, detained, driven to a field office, fingerprinted and photographed in a processing hold alongside immigration detainees. Without a warrant, without matching identification, without any lawful basis whatsoever. The political and legal shockwave was instantaneous, and it was still building. Back at the field office, the mood had shifted. The hallways that had been routine and busy that morning were now quiet in the way that buildings get quiet when people realize something very bad has happened and no one wants to be standing too close to the people responsible. Vanderhook felt it. He saw it in the way supervisors avoided eye contact, in the way the processing staff whispered near the front desk, in the way Solis had looked at him in the break room. He pulled Pruitt and Farrell into a small conference room on the second floor and closed the door. "We need to clean this up," Vanderhook said. His voice was steady, but the ease from earlier that morning was gone. "The operational report needs adjustments." He laid out the plan. Change the stated address in the report to more closely match the target's last known location. Add language stating that Oyewale had been uncooperative during initial contact and had made sudden movements toward her vehicle, suggesting possible concealment. Include a note that she had physically tensed and pulled away when agents attempted to restrain her. Language that would reframe the use of force as reactive rather than initiated. Pruitt nodded without hesitation. Farrell shifted in his seat but said nothing against it. Then Vanderhook called Kowalski into the room. She stood near the door, arms crossed. "Your body cam," Vanderhook said. "It malfunctioned. You noticed it wasn't recording during the operation. That's what you'll say." Kowalski's jaw tightened. She looked at Pruitt, who stared at the table. She looked at Farrell, who looked at the wall. "Craig, I don't think—" Vanderhook cut her off. "If you don't back us on this, you'll be the one holding the bag. You were there. You didn't intervene. You think they'll see you as innocent?" The altered report was submitted by end of day, signed by Vanderhook and co-signed by Pruitt. It described a compliant but tense subject who matched a known operational profile. It made no mention of a DOJ credential, no mention of judicial status, no mention of a weapon drawn on an unarmed woman loading her briefcase into a car. But what Vanderhook did not know, what none of them knew, was that Kowalski's body camera footage had already been automatically uploaded to the DHS cloud server. A new digital evidence policy implemented 6 months earlier required all body camera files to sync to a secure federal server within minutes of deactivation. The footage could not be deleted, altered, or overridden at the field level. And it had captured everything. The driveway, the knee on her back, the racial comments in the SUV, the processing hold, and now, the conversation in which Vanderhook had instructed a fellow agent to falsify evidence and lie about her own equipment. Every word, every instruction, every second of it preserved on a server he couldn't touch. The DHS Office of Inspector General moved fast. Within 48 hours, federal investigators arrived at the field office and began pulling everything. Kowalski's body camera footage came first, automatically uploaded to the DHS cloud server, time-stamped and unedited. They watched it in sequence. The driveway, the weapon drawn on an unarmed woman, her voice identifying herself as a judge, the force that followed anyway, the knee on her back, the DOJ credential tossed on the ground. Then the SUV. Vanderhook's voice saying these Africans always have fake papers. Farrell's laugh, Kowalski's silence. Then the conference room. Vanderhook instructing Kowalski to claim her camera malfunctioned. They pulled the neighbor videos, 3 recordings from 3 angles showing the same thing. A compliant woman forced to the ground without resistance or threat. They pulled Abrams' 911 call, precise and damning. Then they placed Vanderhook's altered report beside the footage. Every material claim was contradicted. The report said she was uncooperative. The footage showed immediate compliance. The report said sudden movements. The footage showed raised hands, palms open. The report omitted her credentials. The footage showed Vanderhook holding her DOJ badge and dropping it. Internal affairs interviews began the next day. Kowalski, confronted with footage of Vanderhook pressuring her, cooperated fully. She provided a sworn statement detailing the arrest, the racial comments, the cover-up, and Vanderhook's pattern of targeting African immigrants across multiple operations. Farrell hired an attorney and declined all questions. Truitt invoked his rights and sat stone-faced through 2 interviews. Vanderhook retained a private defense attorney who issued a statement claiming the arrest was conducted in good faith based on available intelligence. The investigators read it, looked at the footage, and moved forward. Good faith did not survive contact with the evidence. Leonard Abrams' video reached the press on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, the story had broken nationally. Every major outlet carried it. A sitting United States immigration judge, a naturalized citizen, a black woman, a 12-year veteran of the federal bench, arrested in her own driveway by ICE agents who claimed she matched the profile of a 28-year-old Guatemalan man. The absurdity of the mismatch eliminated any credible claim of honest error. A 52-year-old woman mistaken for a 28-year-old man. A Nigerian-born citizen mistaken for a Guatemalan national. A federal judge mistaken for a fugitive. The gap was so vast it left only one explanation. She was black. She was in her driveway, and that was enough. Civil rights organizations responded within hours. The NAACP called it a grotesque abuse of federal power. The Congressional Black Caucus demanded a full, independent federal investigation and called for congressional hearings into ICE oversight failures. The National Association of Immigration Judges issued an unprecedented joint statement condemning the arrest as a direct attack on judicial independence. Immigration attorneys across the country signed an open letter demanding accountability. Protests formed outside ICE field offices in Washington, Baltimore, and New York. The footage played on cable news on a loop. The image that stayed longest was the still frame from Abrams' recording. A black woman in a charcoal suit, face down on her own driveway. A DOJ credential lying on the pavement 3 feet from her head. The story dominated the news cycle for a full week, and it was still building. The joint preliminary investigation by the DOJ Civil Rights Division and DHS Office of Inspector General was completed in under 3 weeks. The findings were unambiguous. The arrest of Judge Denise Oyewale had no legal basis. No valid warrant had been obtained or presented. No matching suspect description existed. The target on the operational order was a 28-year-old male from Guatemala. The person arrested was a 52-year-old female federal judge from Nigeria. The force used was excessive against an individual who was fully compliant from the moment of contact. The falsified operational report submitted by Vanderhook and co-signed by Pruitt constituted obstruction of a federal investigation. The racial comments captured on Kowalski's body camera constituted direct evidence of bias-motivated conduct. The instruction to falsify body camera records constituted conspiracy to obstruct. The suspensions came the same day the findings were delivered. Vanderhook, suspended without pay. Pruitt, suspended without pay. Farrell, suspended without pay. Kowalski was placed on administrative leave with pay, her cooperation noted and her status held pending final review. Firearms were confiscated. Credentials were deactivated. Access to all federal systems was revoked. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland convened a federal grand jury the following week. Witnesses were called. Evidence was presented. The body camera footage was played in its entirety. Within 2 weeks, indictments were returned against Vanderhook, Pruitt, and Farrell. The charges were severe. Deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Conspiracy against rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241. Obstruction of justice. Filing false federal reports. Each charge carried significant prison time. Combined, the maximum exposure for Vanderhook alone exceeded 20 years. The federal trial began on a Monday morning in a packed courtroom in Baltimore. Prosecutors opened by playing the body camera footage and the neighbor recordings in unbroken sequence. The courtroom watched in silence as Judge Oyewale was ordered to the ground, forced onto the concrete, kneed in the back, and cuffed while calmly identifying herself. They heard the glasses crack. They heard Vanderhook dismiss her DOJ credential. They heard the SUV recording. These Africans always have fake papers. They heard the conference room recording. Vanderhook instructing Kowalski to lie. Kowalski took the stand and testified in detail. She described the pressure to falsify her body camera record, the racial remarks she had witnessed across multiple operations, and the unit culture that made questioning Vanderhook professionally dangerous. She was calm, specific, and consistent under cross-examination. Leonard Abrams testified next, describing what he saw from his window that morning. A federal judge treated like a fugitive on her own property by agents who never checked whether they had the right person. Then Judge Oyewale took the stand. She described the terror of being forced to the ground in her own driveway at dawn, the humiliation of being fingerprinted and photographed in a concrete hold room beside immigration detainees. The moment she understood these agents had no idea who she was and did not care. She described the scrape on her cheek that took weeks to fully heal, the glasses she had to replace, the nights afterward when she could not sleep in her own home because every sound outside her window triggered the memory of boots on her driveway. The defense argued good faith operational error. Prosecutors dismantled this in minutes, displaying the suspect profile beside Judge Oyewale's photograph on the courtroom monitors. A 28-year-old man next to a 52-year-old woman. The jury looked at the images. There was nothing left to argue. They deliberated for less than a day. The verdicts came back the same afternoon. Guilty on all counts for Craig Vanderhook. Guilty on all counts for Scott Pruitt. Farrell, who had cooperated partially during the trial and whose attorney had negotiated limited testimony in exchange for consideration, was found guilty on reduced charges. The courtroom was still when the foreperson read each verdict. Vanderhook stared straight ahead. Pruitt's head dropped. Farrell closed his eyes. Sentencing followed 6 weeks later. The presiding judge, a veteran of the federal bench with more than 2 decades of experience, did not temper his remarks. He called the arrest of Judge Oyewale one of the most egregious abuses of federal authority this court has seen. He cited the racial language, the fabricated report, the obstruction, and the complete absence of any lawful basis for the operation. He noted that the defendants had not targeted a stranger by accident. They had targeted a sitting federal judge and still could not recognize her humanity, even after learning who she was. Vanderhook was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Pruitt received 4 years. Farrell received 2 years. All 3 were permanently barred from federal employment. Their law enforcement certifications were revoked. They would never carry a badge again. Kowalski, whose cooperation had been critical to the prosecution, avoided criminal charges. She resigned from ICE voluntarily the week after the trial ended. 3 months later, she testified before a congressional subcommittee about the internal culture that had enabled Vanderhook's conduct, the silence, the complicity, the unspoken understanding that certain targets were chosen for reasons no one put in writing. 2 supervisors who had approved Vanderhook's operations without adequate review were formally demoted and reassigned to administrative roles. Neither was terminated, a fact that drew sharp criticism from oversight groups who argued the accountability had not reached high enough. Judge Oyewale filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, and the 3 individual agents. The case cited unlawful arrest, excessive force, racial profiling, false imprisonment, and violation of judicial independence. Her attorney, Victor Langston, built the case methodically, but it was discovery that delivered the most damaging material. Internal records revealed that Vanderhook's unit had conducted 19 prior field operations with strikingly similar patterns: wrong addresses, mismatched suspect descriptions, disproportionate targeting of Black and African immigrants in neighborhoods where the actual targets had no known connection. 8 of those operations had generated formal complaints from the individuals detained. None of those complaints had been investigated. They had been filed, noted, and buried, treated as routine friction rather than evidence of a pattern. Langston presented these records alongside Kowalski's testimony and the body camera footage from the Oyewale arrest. The cumulative picture was devastating, not just for the agents, but for the institution that had employed, promoted, and protected them. The government settled before trial. The amount was reported to be in the multi-millions, though the exact figure was sealed. More significant than the money were the mandatory reforms attached to the settlement. Independent review of all ICE field arrest operations nationwide. Mandatory warrant verification protocols requiring supervisory sign-off before any residential arrest. Automatic body camera upload to federal servers with no agent-level override or deletion capability. And the creation of a DHS Civil Rights Compliance Unit with external civilian oversight and the authority to investigate complaints independently. Legal scholars and civil rights organizations cited the settlement as a landmark in federal law enforcement accountability. Not because the system had worked perfectly, but because for the first time, the consequences had reached deep enough to force structural change rather than just individual punishment. Judge Denise Oyewale returned to the bench on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after the arrest. She arrived early, as she always had, parked in the same lot, carried the same leather briefcase, and walked the same corridor to her courtroom at the Arlington Immigration Court. The only visible difference was a new pair of glasses. The scrape on her cheek had healed, though a faint mark remained if you knew where to look. When she entered the courtroom and took her seat, something unusual happened. Every attorney present, government counsel and defense attorneys alike, stood. It was not required. It was not prompted. It was a gesture of solidarity that rippled through the room in silence, and Judge Oyewale acknowledged it with a single nod before calling the first case on her docket. She issued no public statements about the arrest, the trial, or the settlement. She gave no interviews. She made no appearances on cable news, despite dozens of requests. She let the legal record speak because she believed the legal record was enough. Quietly, using a portion of the settlement, she established the Oyewale Legal Scholarship Fund, providing financial support to immigrant students pursuing law degrees at Howard University and Columbia Law, the two institutions that had shaped her career. Leonard Abrams, the retired federal marshal who had recorded the arrest from his window and called 911 while it was still happening, received the Community Service Commendation from the Department of Justice. He attended the ceremony in a suit he hadn't worn in years and said very little afterward. When a reporter asked him why he had started recording that morning, he said, "Because I knew what I was seeing, and I knew no one would believe it without proof." Craig Vanderhook began his 6-year sentence at a federal correctional facility in West Virginia. He never apologized. Not to Judge Oyewale, not to the court, not publicly. His name became a case study in federal law enforcement training programs across the country, taught alongside the footage his own team had recorded. A training bulletin circulated through DHS the following quarter. It carried a single still image from Kowalski's body camera, a black woman in a charcoal suit, face down on her own driveway, 4 agents standing over her, a DOJ credential lying open on the ground beside her broken glasses. The caption beneath read, "This is what failure of mission looks like." No names were printed on the bulletin. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets. Just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.
Through the watchful eye of the lens and across the front lines of innovation, we uncover the ultimate truth. Prepare to explore the most significant historical moments that changed the trajectory of mankind.